So if one of you gentlemen would just start by introducing the measure, give the measure number, the agency involved, and then we'll each have you briefly introduce yourselves and tell us why you're part of this campaign, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So this is Metro Parks and Nature Levy 26225. Yes for Parks and Nature.
And how many years is this levy, and how much money will it raise altogether?
You want to get that?
Yeah, it's a 5-year local option levy. It would maintain the current property tax rate of 0.96 cents per thousand of assessed value.
It's going to raise about $100 million over 5 years. A little less than 100.
Yeah, what we've been looking at is approximately 19.5 million annually. So yeah, I guess you put that over 5 years, get close to 100.
And remind me, we've re-upped this twice before?
Correct.
Okay. So for people who may be confused at Metro's plethora of measures, some of which are capital and some of which are operating like this, can one of you guys help us understand the difference? Because I think voters will remember a recent large, I think the $475 million Metro capital bond. So how is this different?
And did you also want us to introduce ourselves?
Yeah.
I was gonna say.
I'm John Glasher. I'm the director for Metro's Parks and Nature Department, just here to provide some factual staff responses.
Okay.
My name is Ashton Simpson. I use he, him pronouns. I am the Metro Counselor-elect for District 1.
Okay.
My name is Bob Solinger. I'm the Conservation Director for Portland, Ottawa.
Great. So yeah, just a little bit of background, if you don't mind. How is this different from the capital bond measure that voters approved a couple years ago?
So, if you don't mind, bonds are for land acquisition. Levies are how we operate those spaces. So maintenance, programming, employing folks. So there's a difference in terms of, yes, it's money being raised, but it's a difference in terms of how that money is being used. One is to acquire property, one is to function, to make it work.
So how will the money you're asking for from voters today, how will it be used?
So one, to continue maintenance of what we currently have, continued operations in terms of the staff, what we're doing to maintain current spaces like Nadaka, Oxbow, Blue Lake, others, Cooper's Mountain, but also in terms of wildlife and habitat restoration, that will go into some of that as well.
So you're talking about paying the salaries of the people that work for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what kinds of projects, when you say habitat, can you give us an example or two of things that are planned with this money?
Absolutely. 1 second.
So yeah, I can give an example. So
Yeah.
we've done restoration projects like out at River Island on the Clackamas River, which is investing into providing better stream habitat for salmon and other aquatic species, and putting in more native plants to help with a more healthy ecosystem. Those are the types of kind of large restoration projects that we invest in some of our habitat maintenance and restoration.
How many people work in the parks and natural spaces area at Metro?
We have 135 FTE.
Has that grown over time? Because I mean, with the capital bond, the most recent capital bond, I mean, I know you guys have been regularly acquiring new property and working on the property you already own. So has it stayed the same, grown, or?
It's been an ebb and flow. As the previous bond was being spent down, we had staff that were, as vacancies opened up, we weren't refilling them, just to be responsible with sort of the funds. As the bond was passed in 2019, we began to add some more staff. With the levy, we've been relatively consistent over the past 2 levies in staffing.
So at times when we've had capital bond discussions in this room, Bob's been part of those, there are people who are critical of Metro for having acquired a lot of land that's not all accessible to people, and I know part of the reason is because of some of it's acquired for habitat and some of it's not ready to be open to the public, like Willamette Cove. What's the agency's philosophy in terms of, how much access you want to allow versus how much you want to keep land sort of fallow for habitat restoration, or so animals and insects and what have you can use it without being bothered by picnickers?
Yeah, as a public agency that owns property, 100% of our land is accessible to the public, or is open to the public. We do have a few times where we have restoration projects that are happening, so we're asking folks to stay out of there in the middle of plantings and things like that. You mentioned Willamette Cove, which is different. It's a contaminated site, so it's really not safe for anyone to be on. But yeah, the rest of our portfolio is open to the public. We have different classifications of our portfolio where we have nature parks and large regional parks like Blue Lake and Oxbow that are specifically designed with parking and human amenities. And then the rest of our portfolio is natural areas where there's social trails, and we do restoration, maintenance, and habitat items, but folks are still out there often walking and enjoying. So.
What's the metro property that is the most heavily used by the public?
I believe sort of pre-pandemic it was Blue Lake and Oxbow, probably Blue Lake because of the large picnic shelters. So we had a number of folks coming up there, and I can find the specific. I know I've got here somewhere the numbers, but yeah, Blue Lake is probably the most heavily used.
Okay. Bob, you're uncharacteristically quiet.
You haven't asked me any questions.
I don't usually need to. We'll get a filibuster here. Why are you here?
I'm here because we're very supportive of this measure. We think it's essential to maintain and restore our natural areas. It's the flip side of the bond measures. Bond measures allow us to acquire land, and then the levies allow us to maintain and restore those lands, and those are ongoing needs. The levy also provides funding for grant programs to give people access to nature programming with a real focus on equity. It's been, from our perspective, an incredibly well-run program since it was first passed about a decade ago. It's something the voters have overwhelmingly supported. And I think it's a real bright spot in terms of the metro region right now. There's a lot of things that aren't working well right now, but our parks and natural areas, our green space programs work incredibly well. And they've become all the more important. We always knew they were important. We always knew they were a critical piece of the urban infrastructure, but with the pandemic, we've seen it even more so. We've never seen a higher demand for access to nature, for recreation, for human health. We also continue to understand more and more every day how critical these places are for biodiversity, climate resilience, public safety. So this to me is just a bright spot on an otherwise a very challenging time, and I think it's important that we double down on these investments.
At times, Audubon has been impatient or critical of Metro's, the pace at which Metro spent the capital bond money, a separate measure, the $475 million, and you've been eager for Metro to move faster on Willamette Cove as well. So is there a particular focus, if this levy passes, is there a place that you hope that Metro will focus its activity, or are you happy with the way the money's being spent right now?
Let me answer that in two parts. The first part is, you're correct. We are also a watchdog group, and if we don't think things are happening the way they should, we will be critical. We consider Metro an incredibly important partner, but we also will speak out when we see challenges. You and I spoke about the bond measure. We did feel it was slow getting off the mark. There were a lot of reasons for that, but I think when we spoke, I also said that there was still plenty of time for a course correction, and if that happened, no harm, no foul. That's where I feel we're at today. We went through the pandemic. Metro is trying to do things differently in terms of being more inclusive. There have been a lot of staff turnover. You come up with a variety of reasons, but it was a little slower than we had hoped to see. But at this point, we feel that the bond measure is cranking along. There have been acquisitions. Metro just announced the trail funding. There's exciting conversations going on about West Staten Island. So in terms of the bond measure, we feel that it is now, kicked into full gear. No one's going to remember a 6-month, 8-month delay in terms of moving things forward. And we have every expectation that it will meet the same high standards as the past bond measures. So, and if we didn't feel that way, we wouldn't be here today.
Right.
As far as this measure goes, I'm excited about all 3 parks. First of all, some of our park systems have real challenges. Portland has a multi-$100-million backlog of maintenance. We need to take care of these places. This is about taking care of Metro's parks and green spaces, making sure that the investments we make are maintained and improved. We're seeing really exciting places open up. I like Jehalem Ridge, Killing Creek. There's really, really exciting things happening as a result of the investments we made. There's also just a huge number of ongoing projects that are happening, and that restoration projects. So I think about I think there were 128 restoration projects in 2021. So they're all across the region. Some that excite me: St. John's Prairie. That's a site adjacent to Smith and Bybee Lakes that was formerly landfill. It's turning into an amazing prairie, providing habitat for some really imperiled species. Habitat for meadowlarks, our state bird that we don't really see anymore very much because we don't have habitat for it. Street-horned larks, an endangered species. Western pond turtle is a state listed species. So I'm excited about sites like that. I'm excited about the acquisition that just occurred at Killen and restoration that's happening out there. Cooper Mountain, a lot of restoration happening on that site. Metro is really actively involved in oak habitat restoration all across the Metro region. That's one of our most imperiled habitats, and there's a tremendous amount of energy from the community going into oak habitat restoration in particular, and Metro is a leader in terms of those kinds of projects. So I can keep going if you want, but you get a sense.
Yeah, I get a sense. Yeah.
They're moving on. This measure lets them move on multiple fronts. Then the last piece that I also want to just make sure you capture as well is there is a grant program attached to this. It's shifted over the years to focus much more heavily on equity, underserved, marginalized communities, making sure that there are partnerships occurring, that some of the traditionally funded organizations are really partnering up with communities that have been underserved. And that's a really exciting program as well that's run very well.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Ashton, you and I have talked in the past about sometimes the lack of opportunities and resources in East Portland for people of color, for low-income people in the region. And sometimes when you look at Metro, it's a pretty white agency, and it's a pretty, a lot of the stuff that Metro focuses on may not have always historically been equity focused on that sort of, high-end performing arts centers. We got the zoo, we got these parks. So I don't want to put pressure on you as a new incoming commissioner. You're not even in yet. But so how are you thinking about that, and what kind of opportunities are there to broaden Metro's appeal and the access that it offers?
That's a good question, and honestly, Metro has been doing the work now. I wear a number of hats, one of which is an executive director of a nonprofit around active transportation and movement. We've partnered with Metro to not only provide opportunities for communities of color to engage with nature spaces at Metro parks like Oxbow and Adaka, but we've created an entire Afroecology healing series around that in partnership with those organizations like Play, Grow, Learn, Beyond Black, the Portland Fruit Tree Project, others, Imagine Black Community of Portland. I think the intent is there. Metro is moving in the right direction in terms of engaging that, because they give us their full support, from free parking passes to free life vests for kids and families as they come out and engage us in that space. So, we want to continue to see that progression and expand on that as we move in. As I move into that role, into that seat, I'm expecting it.
Okay. I know that it's popular with public agencies. I forget, PCC was in here yesterday doing the same thing you guys are doing, which is a rollover without increasing the rate, which taxpayers like because their rate stays the same. But agencies would always like to have more money, and we're conscious of the fact that Metro has really expanded its portfolio of green spaces and natural areas, and there's a lot of unmet needs. So what was the conversation like inside Metro? Did you think about asking for an increase in the rate, or was it always, hey, we'll just stay with the same rate and hope the voters are with us?
Yeah, I mean, we discuss all the different options and sort of look at what's the need, what are the opportunities, and based on our council directions, felt that a renewal of rate was the right thing to do at this time, and staff were able to provide the numbers of how we'd be able to continue the operations and sort of meet within this, within that rate.
So Bob referred to Portland Parks and Rec, which we all know has a huge unmet backlog of maintenance, and they had a long period of time when they didn't develop enough parks outside of sort of the traditional city core. Does Metro have a backlog, or what's the status of kind of your maintenance and the projects that you'd like to do that you haven't done yet?
Yeah, some of those larger projects are under the bonds because it's some larger capital needs at places like Blue Lake and Oxbow that are just aging facilities that haven't had that level of investment through previous bonds. In terms of the operations and maintenance, I'd have to get the specific number of what our backlog is on capital. But yeah, there's always something breaking every single day, and so we're just working to stay on top of it and do more of the preventative maintenance type work.
So I think Johnson Creek is city, right? All the restoration that was done on Johnson Creek and the wetlands, that's a city project, or is that a Metro?
A lot of it's a city.
So does Metro have, I mean, to risk of moving into dangerous territory here, we if you go to Johnson Creek wetlands, or if you go out to 1,000 acres, places where there are big pieces of green space that are sort of not incredibly well patrolled, there's been a ton of degradation as people have camped and made messes, and I'm not judging them for that, but I'm curious what Metro's experience is in terms of people, unsanctioned camping on your properties. Have you suffered a lot of damage? Do you have big problems? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a delicate situation in trying to balance the complexity and the balance of human needs and land and habitat. And so we do have, no camping policies except for at Oxbow where we provide that. And through the council direction too, with the housing bond and the supportive housing services, is trying to meet people where they're at and balance the need for habitat restoration and protection, but also meeting folks where they are out in the natural areas. And so working to help get them connected to those social services, and then do the cleanup and restoration work after folks move on.
Is there a place that you're seeing a lot of camping even though it's not allowed?
There was a lot more during the pandemic following sort of CDC guidance to say it wasn't recommended to move people. So there was a large chunk of 2020 and a good part of 2021 where there was a number of large camps in the Newell Creek Canyon area.
That's in Oregon City?
Oregon City,
yeah.
Yep. So that was one of the large areas. There's, I'm trying to think what else was on major areas on our properties. That was the main one that really jumps out to me. I think there were some along Johnson Creek. We do have some property holdings there. Yeah.
What about, you guys own a lot of the Springwater Corridor, don't you?
Portions of it. There's agreements that we have with IGAs, with the local providers, where we might hold the fee title, but the management responsibilities falls to the local jurisdictions, often with all of the regional trail system. We'll help with the planning, convening of it, and potentially purchase of portions of it, but the management of the trail system itself lands to the local jurisdictions.
Yeah. So I'm guessing the 40-mile loop, or the sort of big loop around, that's capital, that's not this, right?
The operations and maintenance would be, but for that 40-mile loop, most of it is like maintained by City of Portland.
Okay,
Mhm.
local stuff.
There's portions that come through the Blue Lake Park, but that's a small section of that Marine Drive Trail. So.
Okay. What else have we asked you about this that we should be thinking about?
If I can.
Please?
So for me, parks and nature make up a good fabric of our community. We're known for that. We're known for the nature. It's almost sometimes why people come to visit Portland. One of the things that, again, wearing a different hat that I would love to promote or put out there is these nature spaces, these parks are our lifeblood. These are our local lungs. If we don't maintain those ecosystems in the same rate as we are developing within the city core or whatever urban development, we risk hurting ourselves in the future. So I think we have to, continue to support levies like this, bonds that do help expand our parks inventory and open up that access to folks, because at the end of the day, I think we all are feeling the pinch of the climate crisis we're going through. I know out in East Portland, these parks not only are places for recreation, but they're refuge. They're for police. I live right next to Glendevere Park. I often go through there to go and walk on hot days because we don't have AC. We don't have the infrastructure to keep ourselves cool. So really thinking about how this common serves a lot of people more, and thinking really about our vulnerable communities, our elders, our youth, and people of color who typically don't have the wealth to have, cooled off homes and things like that. So I'm really thinking about how we view parks as a part of our fabric as a region.
Okay, thanks. You actually triggered something for me, which is that the city of Portland seems to have a little bit of a chaos, confusion around its tree planting goals. And I'm wondering, you guys, I know a lot of the land that you have acquired is already heavily treed, but does Metro plant trees?
Yeah, we certainly plant trees.
So do you have sort of annual goals? This year we're going to plant 100,000 or whatever it is? How does that work?
No, we don't have sort of that regional. We focus site specific. Each site we develop a site conservation plan. What is the type of habitat you want to have there? Is it an woodland, upland? Is it a riparian? Is it a prairie? And so with that sort of set out mapping and setting the 5, 10 and long-term vision for what is the best sort of habitat for that site. And sometimes that comes with more potentially shrubs, or sometimes it is more trees, or it's savanna type grasslands. And so it's really about looking at what's happening to each ecosystem around the region, and focusing in the naturehoods that we sort of laid out in the system plan, and kind of following some of the guidance of the Green Spaces Master Plan, and of sort of that regional focus, and looking at each different habitat specifically.
I also know too that a lot of the grants focus on planting trees as well.
Okay. So because this is a serial levy every 5 years, does your staff have, when you hire people, do you hire them and say, hey, we're not offering you forever employment here, we're offering you employment till the end of the next levy and you may not be able to stay on? Or does that not part of the conversation?
In the past, we had done some limited duration appointments, and we realized that we wanted to make a commitment to staff, and so a lot of times it's easier just to have a regular status employment, and between bond levy and the general fund, trying to make it work, but also being honest with folks. We're all sort of at-will employees, and I think folks know the reliance we have on the voters every 5 and 10 years to deliver. So,
and so in some public agencies, we worry about backfilling. Like if this money comes in, will there be less general fund coming to parks and natural area, or will you get the same general fund allocation that you get now?
We're set to get the same general fund, but that's a council decision every annual budget cycle of sort of looking at that. So.
Okay.
And we haven't seen that. What we've seen is that Metro has been continuing to invest and build
Yeah.
And I really just want to capture that too, because I think this has been a visionary program. And I think you can look around the region and see what the alternative is if you don't think holistically about this kind of work. How do you continue to build, expand, meet evolving needs? I think about the inside-outside strategy, which, you know, back in the 90s was criticized. You know, why are we buying land at the edge of the region? Metro took an inside-outside strategy so that we're getting sites in the urban core, but also when you look at sites like Oxbow, which wasn't bought as part of the bond measure, most popular park in the region, lots of underserved communities out there. You look at Jehalem Ridge, the design for that at the other end of the region, largely involved frontline communities. Metro made a real emphasis when they did the outreach for the master planning to focus on frontline communities that were local to that park. So I think it really has proven itself in terms of the bond measures and that strategy. And then coming in a decade ago with the levies, and I remember those conversations talking about we really need to make sure we have the ability to continue to open these parks up, work with communities, maintain them. And so when I think about the region from sort of a holistic perspective about parks and natural areas, Metro is really a model. It's working, it's stable, it's making progress on the ground. It really has evolved with the times. You said that Metro wasn't always good about equity. The first bond measures did not focus on that. The second one did. The third one, the whole thing was focused on it. We could do the same thing with the grant programs. Very traditional to begin with, and then now almost entirely focused on equity. So there's been a huge transition there as well. So I think one of the things that I think about with these measures is that we have something that is working well. There's always a backlog. There always will be. I mean, that's just the nature of maintaining facilities. But Metro's, if not ahead of the curve, at least on the curve. And there's a lot of places that are not right now. And once you get behind, it's almost impossible to catch up again. I love your question about could you have gone for more. My answer is yes. I'd love to see an editorial from Emily that says they should have gotten bigger. But you know, we agree as well that this is the right size for this time. There's a lot going on, so let's stay on course, keep things going, and let's get a lot of work done in the next 5 years.
All right, I don't have any more questions. Lucas, any questions for you?
I mean, do you guys, maybe this hasn't been answered, but do you have data on how much use increased or decreased during the pandemic?
Let's see, I know I had some numbers. I don't have the specifics, but in general, we get about 2.5 million visitors across our 12 sites, which is 19 parks and 3 boat launches. And yeah, I don't have the specific number, but I know there was definitely a decrease at Blue Lake. There was a decrease at Blue Lake because Blue Lake, one of the main attractions was the picnic shelters, large shelters, so they had big, massive events. So what we saw was less of the large groups, which have come back now, but during about a year or so when we weren't opening the shelters due to the pandemic restrictions. So we saw less large groups, and then there were more people. We were getting more on the trail counters and kind of car counters and some of our other smaller sites.
Interesting. So you think it was an overall decrease during the pandemic, not an increase?
In terms of the large bulk, I'd have to go back. I'd want to make sure I'm giving
just my
fair
curiosity.
specifics. Yeah. No, we definitely saw like consistent usage. I think even in some of the shoulder seasons.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So.
Okay. Yeah, that's all I got.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for coming in, gentlemen. It's really good.
Thank you.
Need these to you.